Hi everybody, this video is about the cell membrane and cellular transport into and out of the cell. So this picture behind me, you can see that it's obviously labeled. This is the structure of the cell membrane. So if we were to just look at a cell straight on, it's three-dimensional, but so it's like a ball, but if you cut that ball in half, you just have an outer perimeter and it's hollow on the inside. And that outer perimeter is what we call the cell membrane. So if you're looking at that ball that's cut in half, this is what it would look like. And the cell membrane is what is this black line that goes all the way around. Now if we zoom in onto this part, just any part of the cell membrane, and we zoom in very closely, this is what it'll look like. Now the official name for the the cell membrane is everything that you see here, but it's actually made up of several different things that are working together. And the biggest thing is what we call the phospholipid bilayer. So you can see that there are two layers. That's where the word bilayer comes from. So we have lipid bilayer. Bi means two, and it just means it's two layers made up of lipids. And if you'll remember, lipids are one of the four biomolecules that we learned about in a previous lesson. There's carbs, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And so we're actually going to see all three of those four, the carbs, lipids, and proteins, right here in the cell membrane. So the parts that make up the entire cell membrane are the lipid bilayer, which are two layers of lipids, and each lipid kind of looks like a little stick figure person that's drawn pretty terribly, okay? You'll see a whole bunch of these lined up, and they're actually lined up, interestingly, with their feet toward each other. They have a little head here, and they have 2 feet or 2 legs down here. And their legs are pointing towards each other, and their heads are pointing away from each other. There's a reason for that, and that's because the head is what we call hydrophilic. Now the word hydro means water, and phile means to love. So this is water loving is basically what it means. Because cells are pretty much almost always surrounded by water on both sides. So the parts of the phospholipid molecule, the head and the legs, the part that loves water is going to be the part that's facing the water. And so these hydrophilic heads are where the water is. They're pointing toward the water on both sides. That's why the heads point away from each other. And the legs, because they are what we call hydrophobic, water hating. So the legs hate water, so that's why they're in the middle, away from where the water is. Now you'll also see embedded into the cell membrane are several different things. We have some carbohydrate chains here and everywhere else. But what I want to focus on right now are the proteins. Okay, so you'll see these proteins that are embedded into the cell membrane. And what these proteins are for is they're called transport proteins. Okay? So transport proteins are what allow nutrients to get into or out of the cell. So it's kind of like if this were a wall and these were doors. A door is how you get into and out of a room, so if you want to get into or out of a cell, you have to go through the door, which is the transport protein. Now there are different ways to get into and out of the cell, but we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But what I need to tell you first is that there are two types of transport into and out of the cell. There's what we call There's what we call active transport and passive transport. Now, before I can tell you what those two are, I need to tell you that the main job of the cell membrane is to let stuff into the cell and keep other stuff out, or let some things out of the cell and keep other stuff in. So it's just to regulate what comes in and what leaves. And the way that it does it is you have stuff on the outside and you got stuff on the inside. Some stuff on the outside needs to get in, some stuff on the inside needs to get out. And the way it works is that, let's say you have lots of stuff on the outside and you have a little bit of stuff on the inside. Well, this creates what's called a concentration gradient. And a concentration gradient is a direction of flow from high to low. And yes, I did rhyme on purpose. So if you have a lot of stuff on the outside of the cell, you have a high amount. And if you have a little bit of stuff, that same stuff is what I'm talking about, the same thing, whatever that thing is, it's not important right now, but if you have a lot of it outside and you have a little bit of it inside, you have a high amount outside, you have a low amount inside. And it always flows high to low. So your body, your cells are constantly trying to regulate and equalize the amount of stuff on either side of the membrane. Okay? So if there's a lot out here and a little bit in here, it wants to bring some of that stuff from where there's a lot to where there's a little on the inside until there's about the same concentration on both sides, or about the same amount on both sides. And when it reaches that equilibrium, it's called equilibrium, that's when you have equal concentrations. Oh, I ran out of room. It's equilibrium, okay? That's when you have equal concentrations of that stuff on the outside as you do on the inside. Now, I can come back and tell you about the active and passive transports. So let's say that, like we said, we have a high amount of stuff on the outside and a low amount of stuff on the inside. Well, the concentration gradient would be going from outside to inside. That's the direction. Think of this as like a river, and the river is flowing in that direction. Now, if you want to move something in the same direction as the river, all you have to do is toss it in the river, and the river will carry it in that direction. And it requires no effort. So if you just hop into the river and you want to go in the same direction, you just have to lay there. You don't have to provide any energy. You don't have to put out any energy or effort to go in that direction. The river will just carry you. And this is the river, the concentration gradient. So this is what we call passive transport. When you want to move something from a high concentration to a low concentration, that's called passive transport because it doesn't require any active input of energy or effort. But let's say that you want to move something in the opposite direction, okay? Let's say you need to go from low to high. Well, it's the same thing as if you want to go against the river. If the river's flowing this way, but you want to go this way, you have to put out a lot of effort to fight the current that's pushing against you. And that requires energy. So if you're going to want to move things against what we call against the concentration gradient, then that's going to require energy, and that's called active transport. Now, active transport is where these transport proteins really come into play. These guys right here are heavily involved in active transport because they're pumps. Just like if you have an air pump and you're trying to pump air into a tire, you have to put out some effort, and the pump has to pump it and force the air into there. So this is a pump, and that's actually another name that scientists will call it. There's a pump, and it will pump things up against and shoot it up against the concentration gradient to make it move from a low to a high. So that's transport proteins, and that's what they do. You're going to need to know that. So really quick, I just want to review. The lipid bilayer is the main part of the cell membrane. Now, embedded into the lipid bilayer are these transport proteins. The transport proteins are pumps. Another word is a pump. Right down here where you can actually see it is a pump. And it is used mainly to pump things against the concentration gradient. The concentration gradient is the direction of flow from high to low. It could be high inside or low outside. It could be flip-flopped, but wherever there's a high amount and wherever there's a low amount, it goes from high to low. That direction is the concentration gradient. Going with that flow, just like a river, requires no energy. That's passive transport. It's also known as diffusion. Diffusion is another word for that. Okay? You're going to see it both ways, but it means the same thing. So, no energy required to go high to low. That's passive. Energy is required to go against the concentration gradient or against the flow of the river, and that requires a little bit of help that's offered by these transport proteins, also called pumps, which can pump things up against the direction that they want to go and into the direction that they need to go.